Michael R. French is with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing great as well. Now, your new book is called Cliffhanger. What's the basic premise behind the book, first of all?
Well, the full title is Cliffhanger, Jump Before You Get Pushed.
Ah,
Um, and it's about a look in the future, 2030. It's about a small high school in the Midwest of the United States. There's a student body election. And in the year 2030, everything has changed. The scene in Washington has become impossibly polarized. Students in high school are taking a more serious interest in their future in politics. And of course, there's always the different agendas of people who are behind the candidates and what they want for the future.
and what inspired you to come up with this story? Because it's quite interesting.
Well, it's like politics is one of those subjects that seems so divisive. Some
Yeah,
people hate it; they don't even want to talk about it, and other people are obsessed about it. So it's hard to know where your audience comes from this book. The
yeah,
book is written from the point of view of three people. Two are students, senior students, running against each other for student body president. But the third person, equally important, is a 60-year-old history teacher
Hmm.
who is trying to teach everyone to frame their comments and their point of view based on history. Because
Yeah.
history, as Mark Twain said, it may not repeat itself, but it knows how to rhyme. And if you know history, that gives you a little bit of a head start in understanding the future. So that's what I was trying to do as an author. I was trying to look back and to see how things are similar, and if they're different, how different and why.
Hmm.
And in 2030, they're different again, but they repeat certain themes of the past.
Yeah, and because it's from the perspective of different people, how did you break it up? Did they kind of do alternating chapters between people, or is it different sections they all write each part?
No, it's pretty seamless. I mean, yeah. So each different chapters will will be told from the point of view of the three different characters,
Hmm.
and it's sort of at random. I mean, one
Yeah,
character may be the narrative voice in two or three or four chapters in a row, and then not
yeah,
you may not hear from him again for another, three or four or five chapters. So it's always about the plot, trying to keep the plot going, and
yeah.
which character can further the plot the best at that particular time. That's the character you want to have a voice.
Mm. And was it quite hard to picture what 2030 would be like? Because I suppose it's closer than a lot of books set in the future are, but I guess it's hard to know the political landscape, what that would be.
Well, sure, because I mean, politics. I mean, 10 years is not very far away. It
Yeah.
seems like it sometimes, but it's not. And my own vision of it, it's part Orwellian, like George Orwell wrote in 1984 with doublespeak. It's part a sense of that polarization, which is such a plague on politics now,
Yeah.
has continued. But mostly, I wanted to talk about the two young people running against each other.
Mm.
Eventually, it becomes a love story between them, but in the beginning, they're enemies.
Oh.
And the young woman in particular, it's about her courage and her willingness to take risks.
Yeah.
And I think one of the lessons of the book for anybody is you should know pretty soon as you grow up what your capacity for taking risk is. There's prudent risk, there's imprudent risk. Or you a person doesn't like risk at all. But it's important, the decision to make about yourself, because life throws a lot of curveballs at you.
Yeah. And is it a lot of it been partly inspired by perhaps Trump and a lot of, in recent years, particularly with the most recent election, things have happened in politics that are unusual compared to other times, would you say?
Well, certainly with President Trump,
Yeah.
that was for the United States, that was almost unprecedented period of autocracy, in my opinion. When I say almost unprecedented, I mean Andrew Jackson was that way.
Yeah.
So you can always find a connection, but it's something that will repeat itself again. That's what I feel. It's not a one-off, and that's what I kind of explore in the book.
Yeah. And when you were writing it, did the story develop as you were writing it and you came up with things that surprised you later on that you didn't necessarily set out to write?
I'm not one of those people that writes a whole book and outline first and then follows it religiously every day. I would get so bored because I like to surprise myself with things that I hadn't anticipated including, and suddenly I include them. And if it doesn't work, then you go back and keep rewriting. I think rewriting a book 3, 4, 5, 6 times, is to the benefit of the author and the reader.
Yeah, for sure. So when you were younger, how did you first get interested in writing books in the first place?
So I'm on the senior levels, on the senior spectrum of writers. I've been writing and publishing for 50 years. It doesn't feel like that to me, but chronologically, I can't escape that. So when I first started writing, it was obviously pre-digital age.
Yeah.
I was a teenager and sort of quiet, a little bit sullen, and feeling, as most teenagers do, alienated. And my solace was to create my own world, was to create my own poetry or my own stories. And that way I had control over my small universe, but it brought me emotional satisfaction.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, it becomes habit. And you get into college and you start taking creative writing classes and you learn, it's much more complicated than you originally thought, to write really well. It can be a very long process, but rewarding.
Yeah, because I guess a lot of people can come up with a good story, but actually writing it out in a way that is understandable and having good grammar as well and spelling, all that you have to work on, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, telling a story, it seems like it could be very simple. If you tell a story verbally, you take a lot of shortcuts and it's a monotone version. But if you put a story in writing, when you introduce a character, when you introduce an element in the plot, all these subtle things about timing, they really make a difference between, in my opinion, a good story and a great story. And you have to decide what you hope is a great story. You do your best. But it's crucial, and you don't always know when you start, where you're going to have the biggest hang up. For me, it's always in the middle of the book. It's pretty easy to start, and you kind of know how you want it generally to end. But the middle of the book is middle ground when you have your best chance to really develop a character and make him or her memorable to the reader.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the way to do it. And were any of the characters inspired by particular real people?
I think some were composites. But I'm not a person that, as a writer, I don't go out and find somebody and try and bring them to the page. I don't try to duplicate their characteristics. I may be loosely based on them, but then my own emotions come into play. I add my own emotions to a character, but I try to catch the tenor of what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have any more books on the way soon that we can look forward to?
Oh, I'm always writing. It's as I say, it starts as a way to entertain yourself as an adolescent, then becomes an addiction. I believe strongly in writing every day, even though it may be one sentence, because if you lose contact with the written page, it's much, much harder if you take a hiatus to get back into it. So I don't like to talk about what I'm writing next because it's too fragile. When I feel much more strongly and it's in a good first draft, then I would be happy to talk about it.
Oh yeah, that's a good way to do it, I suppose, because then you're not keeping promises that you're going to release something when actually it might not turn out how you want.
Well, you keep working at it, and sometimes you abandon it. Yeah, it doesn't turn out how you want it.
Yeah.
So so there are many ideas that are always playing in your mind, and you have to sort them out.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're really quick and you can write easily, and sometimes you struggle.
Yeah. Well, where are we able to find your book if we want to have a read of it?
Oh, any of the digital places. I mean, the Amazons of the world. Any of those. Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Ingram and Sparks. I think some bookstores carry it. I just don't know which ones, but Amazon seems to be the go-to. Yeah, that would be the go-to.
Yeah. And do you have any kind of social media or a website that we can keep up to date with you on?
Sure. Yes. Yeah. MichaelFrenchAuthor.com. And that goes into I published about 25 books. Then it goes into some of the history of that. And I blog and give my opinion on politics and other subjects that I think are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you.